I am. We're ready? Okay, we call the meeting back to order. At this point, I will defer to Ms. Nikki Lee to talk about the outcome differences with housing and credit counseling.
Sorry about that. For the 13, as I indicated, when we gave out the 13 monies, we asked all the organizations to provide their goals. And then for this measurement, for the 15 grant process, part of these points were based on how many of those 2013 goals they'd met. So simply for this organization, no reflection on the organization, but this is simply a reflection of they had a total of, I think it's 11 goals, and we said what percentage of those goals did they meet, just for a straight percentage to answer this scoring mechanism.
Could you elaborate on what those goals were and
Yep.
how they didn't meet them?
And, you know, definitely all I have is the numbers. I'm sure there's more to the story if anyone has questions for the organizations. But their goals included how many people they were going to counsel, how many classes, participants, publication requests, how many website hits. And then the outcomes were more, they asked their clients certain questions. Did they learn something that they were going to use? Are they more confident? Implementing rights and responsibilities, utilizing community resources, and sustaining housing. And then also, are you more confident to handle your situation? So it's just a variety of measures.
Ms. Hiller, do you have any questions with regards to the chart that we have in front of us?
Well, I'm trying to reconcile the chart here and what's in the application that we have.
And I think this is definitely a good reflection of how this transition year is a challenge for things like this, because no fault on the organization. I'm sure when they
Sure.
originally submitted these 13 goals and it was to one department, you know, now there's a whole new process, so it's kind of part of the transition year, maybe a little confusion about what's what.
But I want to make sure with any of these, not just this one, that we're evaluating, you know, are they providing quality programs and did they set reasonable outcomes and were the outcomes met? And if we're stumbling over how to present them, this is just lots of numbers. Actually, I'm having a hard time making sense
Well,
of this report.
for the 13 measurements, it was all self-reported from the organizations.
Okay.
Uh-huh.
So the organization was the one that stated that they were gonna meet the
Yep.
projection, and then when the grant was done, then these numbers were not met. And
Exactly.
that's where the scores, okay. So it's not that the city established these numbers?
No, we didn't evaluate these for them. These are all this and along with all the other contracted services we've already talked about, those are all self-reported numbers.
So,
Mr. Schmidt?
Well, hold on, let me think for a second. I have a little bit of an issue in using outputs and outcomes as the same. I mean, the question is actually applicant has achieved outcomes, which of their outcomes they achieve at just under 70%, it looks like, which would give them which would qualify them for a 10-point score. When you add the outputs in there, that drops them to under.
Actually, the outputs help them because we
I'm
just looked at the percent to goal column there and how many of them were over 100%, and that counted as meeting that goal.
Then how come I have a total of 24.41?
I think they just netted all those percents to goal.
but you did each, and that's where you came up with your, whatever it is, 11 variables.
Yep. And right or wrong, we were just trying to get some kind of consistency out of a very inconsistent past process. So that's what we did, is we counted, they had 11 goals, whether they be outputs or outcomes, and then we said how many of those did they meet.
I do want to let you know that if and when these are funded, we plan on making everyone require outcomes. So next year we won't have this problem with outputs and outcomes.
Well, your outputs are important too. I mean, if you expected to see 1,000 clients
Sure.
and you only saw 500, and we gave you all the money, that's important. You want, whatever it is, if it's 1,000 clients and 70% of them report that they're doing better, both the outputs and the outcomes are important in terms of that dollars being good investment. So it's not that, if there's a better way to score it, but they're both important.
Madam Chairman, are you approached, please? Are we able to approach?
How does the committee feel?
I'm
I'm
fine.
fine with that.
Please, Mr. Mackey.
Yeah, there is some confusion, and maybe on our part as well, because we have been talking outcomes, now we have outputs and outcomes. I was gone last week, but I understand that you asked for this sheet in addition to what was in the grant.
Again, yeah.
And as I looked at it the other day, also, we missed some, we're talking about outputs, if we're talking about outputs, in numbered council, it didn't match the grant. If you go back to the grant, we're very close to the 1,120. We missed the 307 that were short-term, what we call short-term counseling. And so those did not match the grant.
So if you add the 307 from 2013 calendar year,
Which is within the grant.
then we would be attaining that goal, that output goal. Yeah. So we have 5 outputs and 6 outcomes, just separating the number of 11 that you used a while ago. I should explain, yeah, that's education at the very bottom. I should explain that this was just a little bit different starting from about 2 years ago when Celeste was helping us to do this. It was on numbers rather than percent. So if you're looking at the 2013 projected, that's stating that 106 will say they learned something, but it doesn't give us a way to measure the people who said they didn't. And it's not a percent like we do for all other funding sources. So therefore with 71, that's the nature of 71 people we followed up on. It doesn't even give us a chance to say there were 2 people that said no. So if you compare, like Karen mentioned, page 4 of the grant on the logic model, you can see that 79%, 42%, 90, 98, and 99 obtained our outcomes. This report is really hard to understand or even to prepare. So I don't, if the logic model is true information.
Staff, do you have any feedback to the?
Oh, I just kind of agree that, if you're just talking numbers versus something that's more logical, being able to lay it out, I think there's more value in something like the logic model where you can explain it a little more. You can never just look at numbers like on a sheet like this, but if we're trying to boil this all down to something that's comparable, trying to look at past performance,
Correct.
like I said, there's just gonna be a few years of transition where, unfortunately, I think it is confusing, and she mentioned Celeste, well, there's been 3 people they've worked with on their grants since then, so I feel for them. I mean, even me coming in, they've worked with so many different people, so many different requirements. All the organizations have submitted all their information for the 13 grant process look different. So I definitely, I feel for the confusion and maybe there always being more than just the numbers. But like I said, if we are trying to boil it down and compare to past, that's really all we can do at this point.
Okay.
Well, I guess what we're also saying is that, we prepared a lengthy grant and answered the questions. And in that grant, as Marilyn pointed out, we have good numbers, we have correct numbers, and then a few days ago or last week we were asked to do this quick spreadsheet, which is not totally accurate. It doesn't, but my being a person who's worked for grants forever like you have, the grant is the mother of the information. So we're just pointing that out, that the numbers in the grant and the logic model are correct, and whatever the spreadsheet is, that's fine, but it's there's an error there, and it's also misleading, I think.
Okay, thank you for your comments. At this point in time, I think that although painful, I think that what staff is, if I am hearing this correctly, that the challenge that we're having is a transition issue of having the new system of reporting come through. And if I am correct, then this is the same system that was requested of all of the other contracted services as well.
Yes.
So in order for us to stay uniform, then we would have to abide by this one. What other comments or questions does the committee have?
Well, I had a couple questions.
Yes,
Not
ma'am.
expecting this one, that I just wanted to clarify. Again, you can't just go with the numbers, but my questions had to do with, of the grant, you all are providing counseling in Topeka and in Lawrence and a little bit of statewide, is that correct?
Not in this grant, no.
That was my question,
Just
as to
Topeka.
whether this grant was, so how much of you've got 2 counselors, and how much of the counselor time is actually, I just wanted to make sure that all the numbers here were Topeka only.
Yes, definitely.
Okay. And so is that, how much of a counselor? Is it one person, or?
Do the math, but a counselor can do roughly 4 counsels a day, if we have some. So I do the math up quick. It's more than one counselor off the top of my head.
Okay. Thank you.
Any other questions, Ms. Hiller? Okay. Understanding that this is a challenge because of the transition, we're hoping that next year we definitely have a piece of education for the grantees and just communication with staff as to how to work on these new numbers and these new metrics so that all grantees are evaluated. I think that right now the biggest thing is that everybody is being evaluated on the same path. So with that understanding, does everybody understand where the disparity between the 11 and the 4 is coming from? And therefore, understanding that, is everybody okay with the 81% score?
I'm okay with the 81% score. I realize that there are some issues with the transition, and, you know, these are going to be different, but the funding mechanism that, or the funding allocation that I'm going to recommend wouldn't be affected by that anyway, so I'm okay with that for this year, so that we get this process.
I would concur with that, Ms. Hiller.
Well, I don't know what you're gonna recommend, but I'm struggling. I'm still trying to look through these numbers. I mean, one of their hits was they said that they would do 70,000 web hits.
Web hits.
And got 14, so the score looked really bad, yet apparently that was more than they'd done before. The 14, things like that are confusing. I can't process it all that fast. And I'm not sure
You
web
can-
hits
you
is
can address
important
that.
as something else. Because the councils are really important in this case.
I just want to say, while I'm thinking of it, that this will be prevalent in our next 2 meetings as well. We have many people that on their application said they were going to do A, B, and C, and on their performance at the end of the year, they reported on something completely different. So we're going to have this same type of issue in our next 2 meetings as well, just letting you know.
Okay. I mean, on this one, it was, they did what they said they were gonna do. It just has to do with the
Sure.
numbers rather than something way different, apparently.
Is there a proposed allocation recommendation?
I have a proposed allocation recommendation. My proposal would be to allocate $60,000, which is the amount requested to Community Resources Council. Following that would be $20,000, which is the amount requested to the Jayhawk Area Agency on Aging. The next amount would be for Safe Streets, and I would recommend funding them at $60,000 $849, which is less than what they requested, but slightly greater than what we have down here for total option A. I'll explain my math here in just a second. And for Keep America Beautiful, I would recommend 13,682. These will all be the total option A. The YWCA, 19,155. The Housing and Credit Counseling, 51,314. The way I arrived at that number is we had an over allocation over what was requested for CRC of $1,091. So I reduced that allocation to the requested $60,000, and then distributed the $1,091 to the next two highest scoring grant applications up to their original requested amount. So that added another $485 to the Jayhawk Area Agency on Aging and $606 to Safe Streets.
And this balances us out to 225?
That is $225,000 on the nose.
I would agree with that.
I'm struggling, obviously, with, giving extra money to an agency that had outcomes that were difficult to define and difficult to measure, as compared to cutting an agency that did the services that they said, or whatever the numbers were, and had a hard time reporting them and got dinged down to 5 points. I'm simply struggling with
Which
it.
agency are you referring
Well,
to?
the
that got
top
dinged
one
down?
and the
Community
bottom
Resources
one
and Housing and Credit
Mhm.
Counseling.
had issues with their definitions of outcomes and the reporting of the outcomes, yet had a 15-point disparity in the ratings.
Nikki, would it be possible, I'm sorry, for us to see the Community Resources Council chart for this? If you please, so that we could take a look at the disparity. I think that these are the two that we're really struggling with, so.
Well, I would point out that even if you, based on doing these allocations on the scoring and ranking by staff of the applications, even if you added the five extra points to that score, it would not move them into a place where they would have any increased funding. If you added 10 points to that, it would not move them into a place, I don't believe.
I can't read the chart, so I can't make any further conclusions sitting here right this minute.
I guess I would just say that, we came into this meeting, $240,000 and $240,230 were requested of us from these 6 agencies. We had allocated $225,000. So if somebody was going to go home without getting everything that they wanted, in fact, out of the 6, 4 are going to go home without getting everything that they asked for, but I think we're getting pretty close, and I think we are establishing a process that, while is not perfect, is a process that people can now work for, and I think we need to be very careful about deviating from that for any reason that we can't specifically document.
And I think that the challenge that we have with this, and this goes back to why I would have preferred for us to just go without agency names, is that everybody knows what different organizations, some of us have better understanding of what different organizations do. And because of that, we have to be extremely cautious that we do not go based on the organization's name, that we are going based on what the numbers are saying. And it is very hard having an understanding of what an organization can do versus what the document is saying. Even if it was a transition, I know that this is extremely hard because we all value what each organization is bringing to the table. But the challenge is that we have to ensure, one of the main goal for this committee was to ensure that we were going to be basing ourselves on we were gonna stick to the process. We were gonna stick to the process. And we understood that the process was not gonna be perfect. However, the process has proven, just in this first round, even though it's not something that we can 100% agree with, every single question was answered adequately by staff, and everything had a proper rationale, even if at this point in time, the rationale is transition. But everybody is being scored in the same exact fashion. It's not what we know that an organization can do, it's what the organization demonstrated on the paper. And again, I think that this puts a higher burden as us and on the staff to ensure that when we are communicating for next year's grant, that we communicate specifically what we're looking for, and that we have good communication with the organizations to ensure that they are able to produce spectacular grants.
I think one of the most valuable things, and it's coming out now, is that we do want to track it from year to year, obviously, and that takes some transition to do. And I know that people had some misdirections along the way. So settling in with an outcomes-based and staff that's consistent with that would be really helpful. Understand that.
Okay, so that being said, I would entertain a motion for $60,000 for Community Resources Council, $20,000 for Jayhawk Area on Aging, $60,849 for PARS, $13,682 for Keep America Beautiful, $19,155 for the YWCA, and $51,314 for Housing and Credit Counseling. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Do I have a second?
Second.
All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed, same sign?
I'm not comfortable with it yet, so it's fine.
Okay. Vote passes 2-1. These are the allocations as described for the first round of services, which was contracted services for the city of Topeka. I want to thank every single one of the organizations for being here and being able to answer questions, and of course for all of the hard work that you do in the community. Our next item on the agenda, I have spoken with Mr. Frye, and he has asked for a deferral of the matter. In the last meeting, it was announced to the committee that DTI was intending on discussing funding, not as a grantee of the city, because this does not fall under grants, but as part of the economic development portion that this committee oversees. Mr. Frye has informed me that at this point in time, he would prefer to defer this because he is looking for different funding options and alternatives, and that if needed, he would get in touch with the committee at some point to let us know if there is an interest in the committee evaluating it. Mr. Frye is here. Is there any comments that you would like to add to that, Mr. Frye?
Thank you. No, you're absolutely right. I'll go over here.
Pick a mic, any mic.
I appreciate that. That is correct. We feel this is an economic development request. This committee certainly is dealing with social service issues, so we are deferring to seek some possible alternatives to the funding source.
Okay, any questions from the committee for Mr. Frye?
Not so much for Mr. Frye as perhaps for Mr. Colson. We got surprised by having this added to our agenda last time, but if there was a need for a recommendation from this committee to come forward so that there was a placeholder in the budget, that needs to happen before the end of the month. I just,
We'll start
trying
with
to-
the deferral request.
okay.
Any other questions? Thank you, Mr. Frye.
Thank you.
That being said, at this point in time, I would open up for any comments, reflections of the committee that you would have at this point. After going through the first round, I know that this was a very difficult process. I think that everybody here can appreciate how seriously we take this, because we understand the impact that it has on the organization's funding. We understand that this is not just staff that is being affected, but it's also the potential of residents of Topeka receiving services. So this has been a very measured. One of the things that we enjoy with this committee is that we can all disagree with respect. Very measured, but very intense conversation that we've had here. So any remarks, any comments, any questions? Ms. Hiller? None?
I would just like to say thank you very much to staff. You've done an excellent job all the way around, very thorough job. This is a difficult process. It's a painful process. It's painful from this side of the table anyway. And I'm sure we're causing some pain on the other side of the table, but we're trying to do this right. We're trying to establish a precedent so that we can be better at this going forward and get better every year. And I thank all of you for your participation and your patience as we learn in this process also.
I would like to echo those sentiments. It was wonderful working with staff. Poor Corey was receiving email after email from me so that I could be prepared for today's meeting. Nikki was also, she discovered how quickly I respond to text when I'm working on something, and Brad as well, and the whole staff overall. It was just wonderful working with all of you. This, again, was a hard task. Yes.
I will go ahead and make a comment. Michelle asked me during the break, she said, "Are you upset?" And I said, "No," but I do take this really seriously, and aside from the support from the staff, which has been, I think we're making very good steps and going the right direction, but the agencies have been wonderful. You all have been attentive. You've been thoughtful. You've given us comments in the meetings, and I don't know if you're going to take comment today or not, but in the meetings and otherwise, and have done your best to help us frame this process and do a good job with it. So my face is because I've sat on that side of the room. I take it very seriously sitting on this side of the room, and I want us to do a good job, and I'm just very sensitive that this is our first time through with some expectations, a bar that I think we all agree to, but that we have to set the foundation to move forward. So thank
Absolutely.
you. So the face is better.
In wrapping up, one of the things that Corey and I were discussing this week was, once it was established early in the procedure that once the allocations and the scoring were made open, the staff would have a chance to go ahead, the agencies would have the opportunity to go ahead and work with staff to see how you could work on your grant for next year to start getting prepared. So prepare. And although we have 15 minutes, I would invite the agencies, if there's any comments, any feedback, to feel free to let me know so that I could recognize you if you have any comments. Okay. Well, if there's no other comments, neither from the committee or from the agencies, thank you, agencies, for all that you do for our community. Topeka's a better place because of all of you. And that being said, I would entertain a motion for adjournment.
So,
Okay.
second.
All in favor, aye?
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. Meeting adjourned.
You didn't vote.